Now, I know we have a clock, and I would love to make sure that that clock is on so that we try not to go over your tea time. Let's read the scriptures for this morning, but before I do, let me make just one or a couple of observations. I'll try to take this sermon this morning, just cut it down a little bit and hopefully get to the meat of what I hope will be a blessing to your life as it is to my life. What I'm going to share, it tends to be language that clearly is patriarchal. It is what it is. It is part of our scriptures. So keep that in mind when we read the scriptures. Okay? Second, that whatever I say related to the subject for this morning applies to any form of marriage. Any binding of two human beings that love each other and have made a covenant commitment to share life with one another. Regardless of whether that is a same-sex relationship marriage, whether that is a classical heterosexual marriage, whatever kind of marriage. We're talking about marriage, period. So please keep that in mind. The union, the caring, the covenant relationship between two human beings that God has brought together to love each other and to nurture each other. Please keep that in mind. That in mind, let me read the scriptures for this morning. Some Pharisees came, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Again, patriarchal language here. And he answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Well, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh." Again, keep in mind the patriarchal language here. "Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. And he said, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another," and we'll end with this verse, "she commits adultery," period. Because the story that follows in the reading for this morning includes the story of Jesus blessing the children. But for time's sake, let's move on. When Sarah in the office emailed me this week to ask me whether I was going to use the gospel lesson for today, I must confess, I kind of knew where the lesson was or it was about, but I wasn't sure. So I said to her, yes, it'll be on the gospel lesson. And which is usually my preference. Not always, but usually my preference. And then I soon realized that maybe I must have picked the wrong text for this morning. But it was too late. That was Wednesday or Tuesday morning, rather. And Sarah, of course, being as efficient as she was, already started to prepare for Sunday morning. But I'm excited to be here to just take a few moments, just a few moments. I'll try not to be too long-winded this morning. We've got communion as well, so we'll try to get you out of here as quick as we can. But I'm excited that I did. And I say that because I know very well that after 26 years in ordained ministry, how Christians throughout the ages, especially today more than ever, have used this subject to pistol whip and baby seal club other Christians because they're divorced and have remarried. I've heard the pain in the stories of men and women who have struggled with this ugly language, quite classical among certain Protestants, certainly our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters as well, but especially among our more fundamentalist friends. Bless their hearts. But in my ministry, I've reviewed and studied the subject enough to feel comfortable that what I want to share with you this morning, although I'm not into apologetics, I don't have to defend God. I don't have to defend Jesus. Jesus can defend himself. God can defend God's self. I don't need to be apologetic this morning. But I feel that I must share a few possibilities that I want you to take with you this morning around this very subject. And I'm going to cut a lot in my sermon for this morning, but we'll do the best we can. My review of the literature and discovering, especially on the internet, because you know how exact and precise the internet is. I discovered a number of YouTube videos on this subject. So I just Googled YouTube videos on Jesus and divorce. Literally hundreds. And the vast majority of them, probably 99% of them, were from my more conservative, more aggressive, more fundamentalist, more Bible-centric eccentrics, rather than good, balanced preachers from traditional communities of faith. I wish there were more. I really wish there were more. But unfortunately, that's the reality. We often don't think in mainline churches how important these subjects are, and to present them in a way that makes sense and heals rather than humiliates and denigrates the other. So I'm going to try to share some thoughts on the subject, because that's the subject for this morning. That's what Sarah said I was going to preach on. You know the story. And you know how often the religious leaders love to tempt Jesus. So they came, as usual, to tempt Jesus to see if they can catch him in the act, if you will. If he somehow violated some of Moses' laws or principles or ideals, and to catch him on the act, and to use that as an excuse to eventually be instrumental in what happened to Jesus at the end of it all. They attempt to do that by asking him in this occasion a simple question, his opinion on marriage and divorce in light of the two rabbinical schools of thought around the language of divorce at the time. Been around a long time, but at the time, and they wanted to use this subject of divorce, and Jesus knew where they were coming from and understood the two primary schools of thought on the issue of divorce at the time. One, as many of you know, was the teaching of the rabbinical school known as Hillel. And the Hillel school of rabbinical leaders and theologians at the time argued that a man can divorce a woman for any reason. Always remember, it's always the man against the woman. It's usually not the other way around. So that if, for example, I, being married with Zaida for 38 years now, I said to Zaida, I want you to make me could you make me a steak sandwich? And she comes back with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That was worthy of divorce. Literally. If she did something that offended him, that caused shame to him, this community, this theological community, believed that you can divorce the woman, give her the divorce decree, if you will, the certificate of divorce for any reason. The other school, on the other hand, the Shammai school of rabbinical leaders, argued that the only reason you can divorce a woman was if she committed, and that's not again to, I'm not interested in word conflicts here and in word play, but essentially committed a sexual impropriety before or after she was married. And the man can give the woman a certificate of, or a release, and divorce her. And then Jesus' response was really quite radical on the subject. After asking them what Moses taught about divorce, which, by the way, justified in the case of some sexual immorality, in accordance with Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, he advocated a more radical ideal, underlying that word there. That is the indissolubility of marriage, with the words, therefore, what God has joined together, that let no one separate. The classical is, whatever God has joined, let no man asunder. That's known as the no exception clause. And I know this is tough. And since then, as a result of that, the whipping and the clubbing still goes on, especially when we tell people who have experienced divorce that since Jesus seems to suggest that marriage is indissoluble, somehow a subsequent marriage doesn't really count. I find that, to make it very clear, I find that extremely horrible. Such cruelty and humanity in such a theological posture. And let me explain why and share some possibilities. I know how many and how much people have been hurt by this language of the indissolubility of marriage. We have defamed, we have humiliated, we have debased human beings, brothers and sisters in the Lord, because of this language. And I want to challenge us. First, of the three passages that Jesus directly or was directly attributed to have said these words, or on the matter of divorce, of the three primary passages, it's only this passage that speaks of the non-dissolubility, the no exception clause. The other two, the Matthean and the second Matthean passage, have Jesus suggesting an exception clause. Therefore, that there is no such thing as the indissolubility of marriage. In the presence of conflict of this nature, of differentiation, of ways of thinking, even by Jesus and his disciples and the religious leaders of the time, it is fair to say that we really have no answer. That there's variability, there's room for interpretation, if you will. So I want to just share with you, there is hope. Get out of your mind this language that's been perpetrated by fundamentalism in Christianity. There is variability and diversity of opinion on this matter, and thanks be to God for that very matter. In fact, even Paul, in his love letter in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, spoke very clearly that there was a way out. And often the word used was the word translated or from the original Greek porneia, or for those old school, fornication. But you see, even the word porneia has variability in it. Unfaithfulness is the context of the word, and unfaithfulness can be of any magnitude, of any kind, not just a physical, sexual context. Are you with me? So there is variability. Unfaithfulness by one party over another implies more than just physical. It could potentially encompass unfaithfulness in many forms that impact the obligation of one party to the other. And it could be legal, financial, contractual. It can mean anything if you expand it, particularly as we think about the term porneia and unfaithfulness in modern terms. There's always a clause. God always has a way out. And God is always about grace and healing. Always. Not about legalism. Take that home. And I'll end with this one because it's a whole lot more and we got to get home. The idea of the Hebrew word, I'm going to use a word known as halakha, versus the Greek word haggadah, or rather, Hebrew word haggadah, is very, very important for us to understand. See, in rabbinical tradition, in the Jewish faith, there's always a reading of what is law, clearly law. You can't argue with it. And it also understands that there are readings or sayings or teachings by its teachers, that there is room for ideals. And so because we Christians don't take seriously or understand the difference between a reading that is a haggadah reading, a moral and ethical imperative, or rather halakha reading, a moral, social, ethical imperative, or haggadah, a moral or ethical ideal with variability and flexibility. Since we don't understand that, we've allowed others to take the term divorce and the ideal of divorce and remarriage and essentially do whatever they want with it. And we in the mainline churches have often allowed that to occur because we're afraid of being apologetic. I'm not afraid of being apologetic. What Jesus said in the text that we read, in the language of the verses that we read, around the issue of divorce, has to do not with halakha, but haggadah. The principle of haggadah or haggadah. That is, that Jesus said something that was an ideal to attempt to live by, but in reality, it's impossible. For some, it's just simply impossible. If you're in an abusive relationship, run from that relationship. If you are being every other night beat up by your husband or your wife or your spouse or a significant other, your responsibility and God's desire for your life is to run from that. Are you with me? Yes. Don't apologize for it. How many times as a pastor, how many times as a Navy chaplain have I had people come to me and ask me what I thought? And the first thing in my mouth is, God has called you to peace. God's desire for your relationship, for your marriage relationship, for your family is utter, unequivocal, unshakable peace for your marriage. And if you don't possess peace, you have a right to flee from that experience, and you are free to do so by the very grace of God in the Christ who shed his life on the cross for each and every one of us. Because God's desire for your life and my life is to live in peace, not be burdened by some other who's going to take away my dignity and the respect, as Aretha Franklin would say and spell it out, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Is that you live in peace. So let me make it very clear. Divorce or no divorce, you are a child of God. Even God experienced the language of divorce. God divorced God's self from Israel. And he said in Jeremiah 3:8, he said, I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of her adulteries. Yet I saw that her unfaithful sister Judah had no fear. She also went out and committed adultery. God experienced divorce. So now that you are in a new relationship, I bless you. This church blesses you. God blesses you. Go free. Don't let anybody take that away from you. Don't fear what others say. You have been paid by a price. You have been made free. I don't care who you are, black or white, rich or poor. gay or straight, if you are in a relationship of loving another and you have to experience the experience of divorce, as hard as it might be to anyone, you have in Christ the liberty to be free and to live in unequivocal peace. Are you with me? Yes. If you are, we can all say amen. Amen. We end with our time of communion.